Dave from HeadGames here. We're talking 700 horsepower for 2 years in Edmark's Subaru. Let's check it out. So, explanation of services. What did we do to Edmark's head? We did our full port package, and that is intake, exhaust port, combustion chamber, stock size valves, bronze guides, lash mill assemble. So let's take a look at the cylinder heads and see what we find. It said he made 700 horsepower, which is a lot of power for a street car, and it's a heavy ass street car. First thing we're gonna do, I know we don't always do this in these videos, but we are going to check them and see if it is straight. So here's a foul and a half. You barely stick it in there. You hear that little noise? You probably hear other noises too, but see, it barely goes in there. We're talking the head is straight as an arrow. This thing, same thing, straight as an arrow. Foul and a half is nothing. It's about half of the thickness of a dollar bill. All right, let's take a look at the head and see what we find here. On the intake side, I noticed that there was a lot of oil residue. Now, when you see a lot of oil residue, this is from outside of the cylinder head if it's in the intake port, which means it would probably be coming from a source like the turbo or a catch can, some kind of ventilation system, and it's recirculating back into the cylinder head. It'll go into the combustion chamber, unfortunately, and it goes everywhere out in your motor. One question I get asked a lot is people think that they have a valve seal problem when really the problem is blow-by. Now, one thing you can tell is when you have blow-by and you see all this oil here, and as I showed you the oil in the front of the port, when you have a valve seal issue, the oil is only going to be from here on up. It won't be to the front of the port like we showed before. So when you're looking here and you see only oil coming here and into the combustion chamber, that could be a valve seal or a guide issue. Let's look at the combustion chambers. All the chambers really tell a story of how the engine was running, and you can see all the soot, you can see all the oil residue all over the combustion chambers. And there's some cracks. If you see here, there's some cracks in the chamber. Usually on the Subarus, not a problem. Let's look over here. We got, see a lot more soot. I mean, there was just a ton of oil going through this. Oil went through the exhaust port. We'll get to the exhaust port in a minute. And this chamber here, you can see the cracks. Again, it's a normal Subaru thing. I've never had an issue with them. They don't leak. But for it to be this clean compared to all the rest of them, we did not clean this one. It actually had an injector issue. The injector stuck open, and then it became a much larger issue and burned the piston up, and it cleaned the cylinder. And that also could be why they were having so much blow-by to begin with, because when you have an injector staying open, you get too much fuel, it's going to wash the cylinder down, and then you're going to have a problem with ring sealing. And obviously, you ain't fighting that. It's basically more of the same on the exhaust port. You see all the oil contamination here. I mean, there is just a ton of oil everywhere. Usually, oil will turn kind of white. You can see a little bit of that here and here. Maybe if I put a light on there, it might help you. There is a ton of oil everywhere. Nothing, it still made 700 horsepower, but it probably could have made more if it was running right. But unfortunately, things do happen, right? So let's take a look at more parts. We take a look at the valve seats. Valve seats looked really, really good. The 45 is not rounded over. Some of them are a little bit beat up, but nothing really crazy. The head was, and this valve spring was definitely matched correctly, and we didn't see much damage. Totally refresh, rebuildable, no problem. Let's take a look at the cam journals. You can see here that there is a little bit of damage here from, I'm going to guess from when the piston came apart. The oil filter didn't catch everything and some junk went up here, but the rest of them do not look as bad at all. There is almost no damage to begin with here. So easily polished out and we won't have to worry. The other head too, everything looks really good. I'll take a look, look at these cam caps look the same. This is the same journal from that head. It's only like one little line. It's almost like the piston said, hey, line up, let's go here, and then they did it. So all the cam journals look really good. Very impressive for a failure. We'll be able to polish these up. And oh, here's some damage here. You see some damage there. That is from the 431. All right, so that's from this head. Let's take a look. All right, so let's talk about the camshaft. Most of the cams look really decent, but whenever we have an oil contamination issue, when we have fuel, it's going to lose viscosity and it's going to take out parts, or it's going to make metal on metal parts look really bad. And that goes for billet cams on buckets or journals, because now we don't have the viscosity that we used to, and it's just going to tear up parts. Now, I'm not saying that these things are junk, but you definitely see some striations here, and there was some junk that went through the motor, and we're going to polish these and we will measure them and we'll see if they are reusable. Now let's compare the cam that we were just talking about to the cam right next to it. Now you'll see that the intake cam looked really good. I don't really see much in the way of starvation up here, but we definitely see it. There's a little spots here, but nothing really bad. The lobes look great. You don't see any kind of valve float situation, maybe like a little light marks on here, but nothing big. I would say that the biggest problem would be from the contamination. Same thing goes on the driver's side. This is always the side that has to have an issue when it's running in the car, and you see really the cam's look in great shape. This ran for many miles, making 700 horsepower, beating the crap out of it on the dyno. Junior tuned it, and it's just a really killer combo. Let's take a look at the buckets. I did notice this one here, obviously they're much different, right? You can see how all these swirl marks are because when the bucket is in the cylinder head, it's supposed to turn. And this one does not look like it was turning, because this and this is the same color as they are stock or when they come out of the box. And you know, but it didn't eat the bucket, so that's a good thing, even though it was just going up and down. None of these buckets you can really feel anything. So I take this pointer here, you go across it, you don't really feel anything. This is pretty cool because of oil starvation. Now Subarus have one of the worst oiling systems, probably of all of the cylinder heads that we deal with. They oil the head last, and because they oil the head last, it becomes a real issue on any metal to metal parts. Because if you have an oil contamination issue or oil pressure issue, it's going to take out the buckets, the cams, and the cylinder head first. Let's take a look at the spring kit and the Valvetrain. So here is the titanium retainers. So many people worry about using titanium on street cars. You can see here, these things look beautiful. There is almost no wear. I think the car went maybe 30,000 miles, and there's nowhere to, you know, you can totally reuse these things. You see some marks in them, but nothing big. We use the GSC conical. The GSC conical, there's really not much to say here. It's a bad mofo, and we love using that thing. We put it in everything. Valves. So the valves are GSC. These are OEM size. Very little valve float, very little valve float. You can see the valve float would be here. So obviously this thing's making 700. We put a bunch of spring pressure at it, and it's going to beat the valve a little bit, but it's not going to beat it that bad as long as it has enough spring pressure. That's a big misconception. People think that you have too much pressure and it's going to cause an issue. Actually, it's too little pressure. Exhaust valve looks freaking perfect. Like, there is no issues at all here. These valves are going to be able to be refaced and put right back in, and no issues at all. So if you remember in other videos, I've talked about how you can see valve float in the top of the valve. Here you can see 0. That is the exhaust valve. And let's take a look at the intake valve. You see 0 dots. So what usually happens here is we'll see some kind of dots, we'll see some kind of wear, and there's nothing here. We can tell the Valvetrain's super happy, and we're ready to rock and roll. We're gonna valve job it, we're gonna reface the valves, and we're just gonna put this thing back together. And now Edmark's new goal, his new mark, is 900 horsepower, and really I see no reason why this can't be done. With the same package, we've made upwards of 1100 with the S2 cams, the GSC stock size valves, and the conical spring kit. If there's anything you want to see, a different genre or a different part of our process, be sure to comment below. I'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you soon. Toodles.